From legends surrounding King Arthur to being on the silver screen in action-adventure movies like Indiana Jones and comedies like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the mythos surrounding the Holy Grail has inspired books, movies, and maybe a crusade or two. This sought-after treasure has its home in different places around the world, and its origins are as numerous as the theories on what exactly the Holy Grail is. Is it the cup Jesus of Nazareth drank at the Last Supper? A Christianized Celtic object? A hidden bloodline? Or something different altogether? And how does it tie into the legends of King Arthur? Join us in this episode of Histories, Mysteries, and Conspiracies as we take on our own quest. A quest for the Holy Grail. The first thing you should know about the Grail, listeners, is that if it is real, there are probably more than one, which can lead to a lot of confusion. So we're going to take the Grails and their stories one at a time. Maybe. Let's start with the most popular story and make our way down the list. Because guys, this rabbit hole is turtles all the way down. Alright, let's talk about Joseph of Arimathea.
Of course! Joseph of Arimathea!
Yes, I will be making Monty Python and the Holy Grail references throughout the entirety of this podcast thing. Just make peace with it now, listeners. So, in the New Testament of the Bible, Joseph of Arimathea is the tin merchant that seems like a rando disciple of Jesus, who, after the latter's death via crucifixion, asks the governor of the Judean region, a man named Pontius Pilate, for Jesus' body to bury in a cave. This is either extreme devotion of a disciple who kind of pops out of nowhere, or it's something a little more. In his book, The Holy Grail, The Legend, the History, the Evidence, Justin E. Griffin presents the theory that Joseph was Jesus' great-uncle, and this would kind of make sense, as Roman tradition dictated the corpse of a loved one was property of a family member, preferably a male one. So the reasoning is that Joseph of Arimathea and Jesus of Nazareth were related, though I don't really know how some say that he's a great uncle on Mary's side, but you know, a relative is a relative, I guess. After the resurrection, Joe was imprisoned. And while in prison, he was visited by the newly resurrected Jesus and given a relic with instructions on how to perform the Eucharist, also known as communion. Once his prison time was done, he gathered his family and a few other disciples and shipped off to what is now Glastonbury in the United Kingdom. Well, why the United Kingdom? It seems a bit out of the way. It is. But parts of Britain were under Roman rule at the time, so it wasn't that big of a jump. And remember, guys, Joseph was a merchant of tin, and there was a tin mine in the United Kingdom. Legend states that this was where Joseph and the other disciples created the first European church. That community became the keepers of
the Grail?
The imprisoning bit was written by Robert de Baron in his Grail romance, we'll get to that, called Joseph d'Arimathea. In other stories, the Grail is a cup Jesus drank at the Last Supper, and or a dish that caught his blood at the crucifixion, and or when his body was being hastily prepped for burial. One of which Joseph took with him to Glastonbury and buried under the Glastonbury Tor. People have checked, it's not there. Wait, hold on, back up. Like 2 lines. First of all, a dish. Second of all, and/or, and also one of. Do you mean to tell me that the Grail might not be an actual cup, and that it served more than one purpose, and that there is more than one? I mean, this is all assuming that the Grail exists, but yeah. Let's get into the least complicated and then reroute. For that, we need to jump forward a bit to the 12th century, when Grail romances, I promise we're getting there, were the angsty teen vampire genre that we have been cursed with in this century. In his Grail romance, Le Conte du Graal, Chrétien de Troyes never describes what the Grail looks like. He just used the word Graal, which can be translated as a dish or a bowl. Whether a dish or a bowl, or jars of blood, we'll get to that later, It was said that Joseph brought at least one thing with him and his fellow disciples to Glastonbury, which is a lovely origin story. Now let's look at another one. Rewind and stop. Jesus of Nazareth is dead, and he is hastily taken down from the cross, taken to a place where his body can be prepped for burial before Sabbath sets in. The blood that poured out of his side and onto the ground is collected in a cup, and the blood that drains from his body while it's being wrapped is collected in a cup as well. So there's a lot of cups with this guy's blood in it. Peter, that one disciple who forgot about his bestie when his bestie needed him most, divided the vast amounts of holy blood between 3 people and himself. Joseph of Arimathea was given 2 vials, Mary Magdalene was given 2 vials, and 2 went to Nicodemus, while he took a cup for himself. And maybe for continuity error reasons, a cup was left in the tomb. Joseph and Mary hightailed it out of Judea with their holy blood. Mary left the party when they took a rest stop in southern France, while Joseph carried on to Glastonbury, landing in roughly 63 CE, CE being Common Era. Nicodemus stayed behind, and what happened with his blood vials will be discussed in scene 23. Don't worry, it's about an unladen swallow's flight away. Most likely a European swallow, though I think they're non-migratory. Or is that African swallow? You can never really...
Get on with it! Yeah, get on with it!
Fine. So, there's a grail in the UK, and a grail in France, and 3 grails in Judea, and one that is going to Rome, because that's where Peter died. Look, at some point in this legend, there was at least one container that had Jesus' blood in them. They were very old by the time people were writing about them, and are older than Methuselah now. So, these are the backstories of the grails. Now, let's get into the 12th century. For some reason or another, Grail romances that specifically tied into a Welsh figure were popular. Which, I get that the legend of Joseph of Arimathea bringing a kind of Grail to Britain was a thing, but how exactly did it match up with Arthur and his knights looking for the Grail? Well, here's some things. From a literature perspective, there had already been Welsh poems, though it came out in the same century. Peredur, from the Welsh, Mabinogion. Welsh Mabinogion. Oh gosh, Welsh. Peredur, from the Welsh Mabinogion. I would like to take this time to apologize to the entire country of Wales and the entire country of France, and later on, the entire country of Spain. Moving on, have a similar story to that of Chrétien de Troyes, though the names and some instances have been changed. Notably, the Grail in Peredur is a large bowl with a head in it that acts as an oracle. Some speculate that the head is that of Bran or Bronn the Blessed, whom some say is the son-in-law of
Joseph of Arimathea.
And that's all good and well, except that the legend of Arthur, or the historical Arthur, or whatever, was around in the 5th or 6th century. And Joseph and his family planted themselves in Glastonbury in the late 1st century. The second thing is from a social perspective. What society? The Celts. Wait, were the Welsh Celts? Not all Celts are Welsh, but some Welsh are Celts. And the Celts had these things called cauldrons. And cauldrons were a big deal because they provided food and warmth to the family, and they could also do magical things. Some heroes had cauldrons that could magically fill their warriors' plates with food, like the rich fisher kings did in de Troyes' story. It could be possible that Chrétien was given this story by his sponsor Philip of Flanders and put the old Christian razzle-dazzle on it. But even that was challenged by another writer. Before we get into that, let's discuss the rich fisher king and Joseph's son-in-law, Bran, or Bronn, but definitely not that Bran. You know, the one from Game of Thrones, not that one. Who may have been inspired by Bran the Blessed, who had a magical cauldron of rebirth. Grail Bran became the rich fisher king, that, depending on what story you read, Percival or Gawain encounter. But how? How did a 1st century Hebrew immigrant become a 5th or 6th century keeper of
the Grail?
The Grail has rejuvenating and healing powers, which is how Bran lived so long. It can also heal the land that was going through some desolation at the time. But what about the actual Arthurian legend surrounding the Holy Grail? That is almost as complicated as the legend of the Grail itself. Chrétien de Troyes is credited as being the first writer to mention the Holy Grail. The guy had a thing for Arthurian legends and romances, so incorporating these elements in with the Grail was probably easy for him. His last poem, Percival, the Story of the Grail, tells the tale of Percy, also known as the Foolish Knight. See, Percy's pops and brothers had all died whilst gallivanting across the countryside performing chivalrous acts. So his mom withdrew him from society and raised him barefoot in the woods. He didn't really know a lot except how to ID angels and demons. And one day, he sees a group of shining knights and proceeds to stalk them and then talks with them. Shining knights? I think you mean aliens?
No.
Percy decides he wants to become a knight at King Arthur's court and does it, and then goes on a quest where he meets the rich fisher king / Bran. At a feast, a maiden walks around with what is called the Grail. This can be a reference to the cauldrons Celtic deities had with them. The cauldrons male deities had were linked to warfare and armies, while those associated with female deities were linked to wisdom and enlightenment. This will be important later on. Percy, after going a long and arduous journey, take note of that, listeners, must ask the rich fisher king the right questions about the Grail before obtaining it and bringing healing to the land. Now, de Troyes died before he finished Percival, the Story of the Grail. Others either picked up where de Troyes left off or wrote Grail romances of their own, like Perceval, the Vulgate Cycle, the Dido Perceval, which the writer said was purer than the rest because his story came from a monk named Blaise, who claimed to have served as Merlin's, that Merlin, confessor. And eventually, we make our way to L'Amour d'Arthur by Thomas Malroy. But let's talk about Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach. Wolfram claimed to have gotten the same story that Chrétien had translation, and he was all like,
Well, you should know that we had the same source material, but my source came from the original writer. Yes. Oh, you wouldn't know who the original writer is. His name is Kyoto. Kyoto aus Toledo, I think? Kyoto of Toledo, yeah. And just between you and me, this Kyoto man, he has his hands in a certain secret society. Perhaps you have heard of them? The Knights Templar. Oops! So silly of me. My mouth did a little bit of the slipsies and spilling the secret.
And Chrétien said nothing because he was dead. Wolfram made a couple of changes to the story. So one, he claimed that the Grail was actually a jewel called the Lapis Exilis that fell off the crown of Satan when he got yeeted out of heaven. So now we're a cup, a dish, several vials of blood, a cauldron, and a jewel. He also changed who guarded the Grail. Instead of it being the family of
Joseph of Arimathea.
it was
The Knights Templar.
So Wolfram claimed that his story came from someone named Kyoto of Toledo. And is there a connection to the Knights Templar? Some say that Kyoto of Toledo is a reference to Guy de Provence, who supported the Knights Templar. So if this is true, how did the Templars get to Britain? The Templars were an order of warrior monks or priests or whatever who went from working for the church to make pilgrimages to the Holy Land accessible for people who could afford to do that during the Crusades. They were also known for finding holy relics like the Ark of the Covenant, which they shipped to Edinburgh, Scotland, the Spear of Destiny, and the Shroud of Turin. They ended up becoming a powerful order that challenged the power of the Roman Catholic Church, which led to another holy war between them and the RCC. And, it didn't go well for the Templars. So much so that they got a whole superstition linked to their demise. Friday the 13th? Yeah, that's right, Jason Voorhees. It's not just about you. Same could also be said about the Cathars. Wait, Linda, who are the Cathars? The Cathars were a group of people who were Christian, but not the kind of Christian the RCC wanted them to be. You see, the Cathars rejected papal rule, and they also did some hoarding of holy relics. and the RCC didn't like that. So they marked them in the systematic kind of way, signed and delivered by Pope Innocent II. But wait, what sort of holy relics did the Cathars have? I'm so glad you asked, listener. They had
The Grail?
Yeah. At the last Cathar stronghold in France, which was where Mary's Grail ended up, if you recollect, while being besieged, it was said that 4 brothers snuck out a back window and smuggled what they claimed was to be the Grail. There wasn't any textual evidence of the Grail being held there, but in a cave near the castle, there was a drawing of a cup on the wall. And as we all know, a cup drawn on a cave wall next to a heretical stronghold means the mythical Jesus blood cup. Now, the Cathars and the Templars were seen as keepers of the Grail in Grail texts. So how did the Cathars get the Grail to Britain, where it seems to keep on ending up? It's possible that the Cathars spirited the Grail away to Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built by Henry Sinclair, who may have been a big supporter of groups sticking it to the RCC like the Templars. And one day, Henry vanished, disappeared, gone forever. 2 legends stem from this incident. One, the Grail is in a pillar called the Apprentice Pillar, which metal detectors have shown that there is something in that pillar, but the curator of Rosslyn Chapel won't let anyone actually look into it, which makes me question, what are they hiding? The second legend is that Henry hightailed it out of Scotland with the Holy Grail, sailed across the sea, and hid the Grail in what is now Nova Scotia in a underground vault next to a rando well. This was on an episode of America on Earth, which you could watch it, but I don't recommend it if you actually like endings. Most of this stuff is legends and rumors. In St. Petersburg? Yet. But we do have one historical mention of something Grail-like. So the story begins when the Roman Empire, in what some would call an ironic twist of fate, got itself a Christian emperor with a mama who was into relics and pilgrimages, which was great when she found, using air quotes here, listeners, the tomb where she believed Jesus was buried, and there was a cup inside. So this got called the Marian Chalice, and it was going to be the first in many physical cups and bowls that we're going to look at. Now, in 410 CE, a Greek chronicler named Olympiodorus wrote that the Marian Chalice was sent to Britain for safekeeping. So now, there's potentially 3 grails that found their way to, guess where? Glastonbury. There is one physical cup from that time that we can see, the Nantius Cup, transported to a family's residence by monks escaping the impending destruction of the Glastonbury Abbey under Henry VIII. The Nantius Cup was said to have been an old relic from the Abbey, and one that had great healing powers. Mystical church cup, healing powers, sounds like a grail to me. The cup is very on point with the conclusion they made in that one Indiana Jones movie, in that it is a wooden cup. Well, now it's sort of a remnant of a wooden cup. Partially out of wanting divine healing and partially out of wanting a piece of the relic of their own, the Nantius Cup has been bitten and eaten into almost obliteration. It has that connection to Glastonbury, and the stories of the cup go back at least 500 years, but it can't be authenticated, and there is little historical evidence, as the cup has been kept secret by that one family since, forever. All we have to base most of these theories off of is that in 410, someone who wasn't a Christian and had no reason to promote a Christian legend wrote about a cup called the Marian Chalice that was connected to an emperor's mom going to Britain. There is another option to consider when talking about the Marian Chalice, and that is that it is hidden behind the cross of Nivern, a carving of a cross inside a rock. So that's potentially 2 grails, or 2 grails in one. So far, we've been looking at grails attached to
Joseph of Arimathea.
Let's take a closer look at the one Mary had. Mary landed in the south of France, while Joseph went off to Britain, and it was said that she spent the last 30 years of her life there, and when she died, her relics ended up in Vézelay,
Get on with it!
and stayed there since the 5th century. One of those relics was said to be an alabaster flask with Jesus' blood in it. And this might have been what those Cathar brothers fled with when Montségur was sieged, which means that, if legend is true, it ended up at the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, where it either is still or went with Henry Sinclair to Nova Scotia. Let's look at another. This time, we'll be focusing our efforts on the third person to receive vials of Jesus' blood, Nicodemus. So, while Mary and Joseph fled the country, Nicodemus stayed behind in what is today modern-day Palestine and carved the Volto Santo, a wood carving of Jesus' face. And the head was given a body, and in the back of the neck was where he placed the vials of blood. The Volto Santo was kept secret and safe until 742, when the Guardian took it off to Lucca, Italy, where it rested in the chapel of San Martino. I like this because there isn't a lot of mixed up tales with this one. The Grail is a carving of Jesus' face that had blood vials in the neck, and is in a chapel in Italy. Done and done. Which means we can move on to Peter. Now, Peter is often referred to as the first pope of the church, so it shouldn't come to a surprise to anyone that the Vatican declares the Santo Calice of Valencia a holy relic. Not the Holy Grail, but just a relic. Story time. Sometime after the establishment and spreading of the followers of the Way, no way, Yahweh. Anyway, Peter ended up in Rome with the cup or bowl that had contained his portion of Jesus' blood. This was used as the first Eucharist cup, in contrast to the cup
Joseph of Arimathea
was given by Jesus while he was doing jail time for grave robbing, and stayed being used for the Eucharist for 200 years, until Emperor Valerian began, executing Christian officials. The bowl changed hands until it landed in the lap of St. Lawrence, who hid it, and just before his death, he had a Roman soldier whisk it away to Huesca, Spain, where it remained there until 713 CE, when the cup was taken to a cave. Later, a man named Don Alfonso created a prototype Knights Templar and had his knights swear before the bowl. Maybe this is why Templars are depicted as keepers and protectors of the Grail. So, now, where are we at? 4 or 5 Grails in Britain, 1 in Italy, and 1 in Spain, maybe 1 in Nova Scotia. Look, there are a lot of Grail candidates with confusing stories and almost no scientific backing. Like, some of these cups and bowls and stuff don't even date back to the 1st century. And even if they did, there's no way for them to be directly linked to Jesus of Nazareth. So, let us leave the physical Grails behind and get into the weird and maybe even more frustrating. Made popular by the Dan Brown novel, The Da Vinci Code, in the modern era, but certainly around longer than that. This next Grail candidate is not a cup, a bowl, a platter, nor a head in a cauldron. It is a child. The Holy Bloodline theory states that Jesus of Nazareth was married to Mary Magdalene, and they had children together. Those who think this is a thing point to the Gnostic Gospels, specifically the Gospel of Philip, as proof. For there it is written something like, Jesus loved Mary more than any of his other disciples, and he full-on mouth-kissed her. Some people take that literally and say that that's proof of the Holy Bloodline. But here's the thing about Gnosticism. You see, Gnostics believe, they may not have been completely wiped out, that the material world was created by a lesser version of God, and it is inherently evil, their bodies included. But they also believed that a piece of the greatest good, the divine spark, the superior version of God, is within them, but that piece must gain knowledge that can't come from the material world in order to understand its status. That knowledge must come from an emissary outside of the material world. That emissary was Jesus. Now, Gnostics had this huge thing about dualism where the material and immaterial were in such contrast with one another that the only way for reconciliation of the body of a person and the piece of divine spark was achieving oneness, or gender unity, also known as androgyny. Jesus' job was to teach humans to return to that oneness and reunite with God. I say all that to say this. Mouth-kissing someone was seen as a metaphor for passing on knowledge or illuminating the one getting kissed. So, when Jesus kisses Mary, Some say that Jesus is teaching Mary, and Mary is gaining the wisdom of oneness. If we keep to the Holy Bloodline theory, Mary didn't bring with her to southern France vials of blood or a cup. She brought her holy kids, who grew up to be the undisputed rulers of Europe, which was the excuse made by the Moravian Empire. For me, that kind of excuse for violence expansionism is nothing but, quote, dubious assertions by a power-hungry empire seeking to legitimize its rule, end quote. Which meant that this whole time, the Cathars and the Templars were watchers and keepers of Jesus and Mary's descendants, and that was why the RCC was going around wiping the Templars and Cathars out. This theory also implies that there are descendants in the Holy Bloodline today. The final theory that we are going to touch on doesn't have anything to do with cups or bowls or secret Messiah babies. It has to do with you. This final theory states that the Grail is the journey we take to gain healing and wisdom. The quest for the Holy Grail is often a long and difficult journey, where some kind of wisdom is gained and healing takes place. When Percival asks the right questions about the Grail, or obtained it, the land is healed, and Percy learned a thing or two along the way. When Indiana Jones and his pops completed their quest for the Grail, the relationship was restored. Heck, you can even look at Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You might get a chuckle or a full belly laugh, and some would argue that laughter is the best medicine. So maybe the Grail isn't a sacred cup or bowl that Jesus drank from or held his blood, or a platter or a cauldron, or a device to make a sweet poem out of. Maybe the Grail is the quest we take, and is meant to make us better people. Now, I personally don't think the Holy Grail is real. This all came about during a time when there was a relic craze in Europe, as well as a pilgrimage run. It seems like everywhere you went, there was some sacred big toe bone of St. John or whatever, or a chapel in which a girl kept bleeding, and that was somehow considered a holy thing. For me, it's not that far of a stretch for someone to take a cup that looks relatively old and Jesus-like, and say, behold, behold, the cup of the Messiah. I mean, I'm sorry to end this on a downer, but, that's how it is sometimes. So, the Holy Grail, sacred bowl or cup, Christianized Celtic myth, or a journey of illumination. Whatever it is ultimately up to you. Do you have a topic you want covered here? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, go forth and seek out your Grail.